Hello! As part of the 2 Degrees Business Advantage programme, we continue to bring you collaborative, interactive events and community-led content that will help you drive growth, efficiency and profit. This time we turn our attention to data, and in particular, finding the value in sharing sustainability data. Today there are hundreds of sustainability questionnaires and scorecards that businesses use to sort the wheat from the chaff when assessing credentials of companies along the supply chain. And suppliers have to fill in a whole plethora of these questionnaires if they're to do business with their clients. It places a huge burden on the already overstretched supply chain. And what actually happens to the data that's collected? And how can both suppliers and businesses get value from sharing this data? Well, in this series of interviews, we're going to delve into this subject. And today, we're here in the English heartland of Nottingham to visit E.ON, one of the so-called Big Six UK power and gas companies. And I'm here to meet Gemma Coughlan, the E.ON UK's Sustainable Procurement Manager. So Gemma, thank you very much for joining us. Just want to get some insight really into your experience of the whole procurement process here at E.ON. As a business, does E.ON still find sustainability a bit of a chore, or is there a growing understanding that this is a real business opportunity?
I think we certainly are along the way of understanding the commercial benefits of sustainability, and everyone certainly in the procurement team is brought on board with the benefits of doing it and that we should be doing it. I think the biggest challenge at the moment is how. And there's a little bit of a gap of how to move it away from being a bolt-on and a specialist field to it being an integrated part of the sourcing process.
And what types of information are you demanding from your supply chain? So your responsible procurement policy, for instance, what does that look like?
Yeah, so the policy, it's built on the fact that E.ON's a signatory to the UN Global Compact. It sits on our external facing website, and we expect all of our suppliers and prospective suppliers to sign up to it to say that they adhere to our minimum CSR standards. And it also puts an obligation on them to implement it throughout their supply chain. I guess other information we gather would be governance information on organisations, so such as whether they've got policies in place and whether they communicate it out, what they do with their supply chain. Other things specific for us at the moment, key strategic areas around carbon, greenhouse gases, and also international sourcing, so the location of our supply chain. And we're using that information to group our top suppliers. And also helps inform where we can help our suppliers, so we can look at what they're doing on greenhouse gases and see if we've got an in-house expertise or resource to go and help them, and also start shouting about our suppliers. I think it's quite important to promote your suppliers internally.
So how seriously do you take the results of these scorecards? I mean, how much does it actually affect your procurement strategy?
Yeah, and I think that's the point, is it should have an impact. We shouldn't be asking anything that doesn't alter our behaviour, else why would you ask it in the first place? And I think the reality of that is depending on the stakeholder set, whether weighting is put behind sustainability or cost or quality or any other group of criteria will depend on the purchase and the engagement of the stakeholder group. We'll have some stakeholders who are really on board with sustainability, and that will be just as long as it's commercially viable, that'll be the top priority. Other ones really aren't engaged with it, will always see it as secondary to cost and quality and delivery, and they're not making the link to actually they're integrated, and they come hand in hand sometimes as well. So it really just depends on the purchase and the stakeholder set, but invariably in every sourcing process there will be an element of that in our auto scoring and our ranking of suppliers. So there's some questions about sustainability that will always be asked and always be scored, and so it'll always feature a little bit, but the kind of weighting behind it will depend on the purchase, I think.
Yeah, and there's a huge number of these questionnaires out there for the supply chain to fill in, and they look different, they're structured differently. It must be hugely frustrating for the supply chain, particularly for small businesses who have got more pressing issues at the moment. So where do you stand on some sort of standardisation of these tools?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that absolutely wherever we can, we need to get a lot more streamlined and reduce duplication for suppliers, but also for ourselves. The procurement teams need to start challenging themselves and only ask questions that they, one, need to ask, and two, have a method of evaluating. So, absolutely, if it's just nice to have, be clear to the supplier that it's nice to have information, and it's just for context, it's not actually part of a decision making process. I think there's some challenges with trying to make perhaps industry wide standard sets of questions. I think you've got to start thinking, what industry are you even in? You know, supermarkets sell energy and solar PV. Are they in retail? Are they in utility?
Yeah.
And if they're in retail, when we, you know, make sales, where do we sit at? You know, so I think you need to perhaps look more at the actual individual purchase as to which sector it falls into. Equally, when you try to get consensus amongst, you know, many organisations, you know, that can be quite a toil and it's quite challenging to do, and you can end up with huge amount of questions to tick the box for everyone. But yeah, I totally think that there's an opportunity to not only try and standardise and dedupe for the questions and data collection, but also the evaluation. So what is good, bad and indifferent in sustainability?
Yeah.
You know, where are the industry or the, you know, minimum standards of sustainability for different sectors? And also, you know, give suppliers the opportunity to add their own parameters in, but there's some evaluation opportunities there as well, I think.
Yeah, it is hugely challenging. So where do you think things will go in the next 5 years? Are you optimistic that things will become easier for the supply chain?
Definitely optimistic. It's a new topic and it's relatively new to be applied to supply chain, and so, you know, it's progressing quickly. Organisations and suppliers out there are getting more and more used to asking the right questions and answering, and that in itself makes it easier because people are starting to understand what things mean, and, you know, what scope 3 means, and all these kind of things are becoming more familiar, which makes it easier. I think there's going to be an increased amount of standardisation, which will be really beneficial, so we can actually start comparing methodologies and responses and approaches to sustainability. So I think that's going to be a good thing. I think the degree of collaboration will depend on whether people and organisations use it for commercial advantage and differentiation, versus just for the goodwill of progression of sustainability.
Yeah. Thank you, Gemma. It's been it's a challenging subject, but fascinating to get your insights. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Cheers.